The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III walked slowly through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. His footsteps echoed softly against the ornate walls, each step carrying the weight of a crown that had become both his greatest honor and his heaviest burden. At 75, the king moved with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that every gesture, every word, every moment of hesitation would be scrutinized by the world. Today was different from the countless other ceremonial days that had filled his calendar since ascending to the throne. Today marked the annual garden party, but, more importantly, it was the first major royal gathering since the whispers had begun. The whispers that spoke of tension within the royal household, of relationships strained beyond their breaking points, and of loyalties that were being tested in ways the monarchy had not seen for decades. Charles paused before a portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, her steady gaze seeming to follow him as he contemplated the challenges that lay ahead. The weight of her legacy pressed upon his shoulders like an invisible cloak, reminding him constantly of the standard he was expected to uphold. Yet beneath the surface of royal protocol and centuries-old tradition, very human emotions were threatening to surface in ways that could reshape the very foundation of the House of Windsor. The king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, approached with the measured pace that palace staff had perfected over generations of service. His expression revealed nothing, but Charles had known the man long enough to detect the subtle tension in his posture. Something was weighing heavily on the agenda for today's events, something that went beyond the usual concerns of guest lists and security protocols. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive began with a respectful tone that never wavered, regardless of the circumstances. "The final preparations for this afternoon's gathering are complete. However, there are certain considerations that we should discuss regarding the seating arrangements and the order of proceedings." Charles nodded slowly, understanding that in the careful language of palace diplomacy, considerations often meant complications that could have far-reaching consequences. The delicate balance of royal relationships had become increasingly complex since his coronation, and every public appearance required careful choreography to avoid any missteps that might fuel the already intense media speculation. The garden party was meant to celebrate the achievements of ordinary citizens who had made extraordinary contributions to their communities. It was one of the monarchy's most beloved traditions, offering a rare opportunity for the public to interact directly with members of the royal family in the palace gardens. But today, the focus would inevitably shift to the dynamics between the royals themselves, particularly the relationships that had been strained by months of underlying tensions. Queen Camilla had been preparing for the event in her private apartments, assisted by her lady-in-waiting and a small team of staff who understood the importance of every detail in her public appearance. As the queen consort, she had gradually found her place within the royal hierarchy, but the journey had not been without its challenges. The public's acceptance of her role had grown over the years, yet there remained undercurrents of complexity that occasionally surfaced during family gatherings. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was also making her final preparations in another wing of the palace. Her relationship with the king had evolved significantly since her marriage to William, transforming from the initial formality of royal protocol to a genuine warmth that had surprised many observers. Catherine's natural grace and her instinctive understanding of royal duty had earned her a special place in Charles's affections, creating a bond that went beyond the traditional relationships within the family structure. The palace staff moved with practiced efficiency throughout the morning, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation that seemed to affect everyone involved in the preparations. The groundskeepers had spent weeks ensuring that every flower bed was perfect, every pathway clear, and every security measure seamlessly integrated into the garden's natural beauty. The catering staff had prepared thousands of sandwiches and pastries, while the protocol officers had reviewed every aspect of the afternoon's schedule multiple times. Yet despite all the careful planning, there was an element that could not be controlled or predicted: the human dynamics that would play out before the watching eyes of hundreds of guests and dozens of photographers. The royal family had learned to navigate public appearances with the skill of seasoned performers. But even the most experienced actors could have moments when genuine emotions broke through the carefully maintained facade. Charles made his way to the Chinese dining room, where a small gathering of senior family members would review the final details before the guests began arriving. The room, with its intricate wallpaper and priceless artifacts, had hosted countless such meetings over the decades. Today, it would serve as the setting for what many would later describe as a pivotal moment in the modern history of the monarchy. Prince William arrived first, his bearing reflecting the confidence of a man who had grown into his role as heir to the throne. His relationship with his father had deepened considerably since Charles became king, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared understanding of the responsibilities they both carried. William's presence brought a sense of stability to family gatherings, his calm demeanor often serving as a bridge between different personalities and perspectives within the royal household. Catherine entered the room moments later, her elegant blue dress perfectly chosen for the outdoor setting they would soon enter. Her smile was warm and genuine as she greeted her father-in-law, their interaction displaying the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the years. There was something in Catherine's manner that suggested she understood the undercurrents of tension that had been building, yet she maintained the composure that had become her trademark in challenging situations. Queen Camilla joined them shortly after, her appearance impeccable as always, but those who knew her well might have detected a subtle tension in her posture. The dynamics within the family had shifted in ways that were not always visible to the outside world, and today's gathering would test the delicate balance that everyone worked so hard to maintain. The conversation in the Chinese dining room remained focused on the practical aspects of the afternoon's events, but beneath the surface, everyone present was aware of the emotional undercurrents that could not be addressed directly in such a formal setting. Charles found himself studying the faces around the table, noting the subtle expressions and gestures that revealed far more than words ever could. As they discussed the order in which they would greet guests and the timing of various ceremonial elements, Charles became increasingly aware of a growing tension that seemed to emanate from multiple sources. The careful balance that the royal family had maintained for years was showing signs of strain, and today's public appearance would require all of their skills to navigate successfully. The king's thoughts drifted momentarily to the conversations he had shared with Catherine in recent weeks, discussions that had revealed her deep understanding of the institution she had joined and her genuine concern for its future. Her perspective had become increasingly valuable to him, offering insights that came from her unique position as someone who had entered the royal family as an outsider, but had quickly grasped its complexities and traditions. Sir Clive returned to provide the final update on security arrangements and guest arrivals, his professional demeanor masking whatever concerns he might have had about the afternoon ahead. The palace machine was operating with its usual precision, but everyone involved understood that no amount of planning could completely control the human elements that would soon come into play. As the meeting concluded and the family members prepared to take their positions for the garden party, Charles felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and apprehension. These public gatherings were both an opportunity and a challenge, offering the chance to connect with citizens while also exposing the royal family to intense scrutiny. Today, however, there was an additional layer of complexity that made the stakes feel particularly high. The sounds of arriving guests could be heard through the palace windows as hundreds of invited citizens made their way through the security checkpoints and into the magnificent gardens. Their excitement was palpable, representing the genuine affection that many still felt for the monarchy despite the challenges and controversies that had marked recent years. Charles took a final moment to center himself before stepping into his public role. The afternoon ahead would require all of his experience and diplomatic skills, but he was particularly conscious of the family dynamics that would play out before an audience of both invited guests and watching media. The delicate relationships within the House of Windsor were about to be tested in ways that none of them could have fully anticipated. The king straightened his shoulders and prepared to lead his family into what would become one of the most memorable garden party gatherings in recent royal history. unaware that the events of the next few hours would create ripples that would be felt throughout the monarchy for years to come. The palace gardens had been transformed into a scene of understated magnificence, with carefully manicured lawns serving as a backdrop for the hundreds of guests who had begun to gather in anticipation of the royal family's arrival. The afternoon sun filtered through the ancient trees, casting dappled shadows across the pathways where members of the public stood in small groups, their conversations filled with excited anticipation and nervous energy. Among the guests were teachers who had dedicated their lives to education in underserved communities, healthcare workers who had gone above and beyond during challenging times, volunteers who had spent countless hours supporting charitable causes, and individuals whose quiet acts of heroism had made significant differences in their local communities. Each person present had received their invitation based on their contributions to society, making this gathering a true celebration of service and dedication. The media contingent had been positioned at strategic locations throughout the gardens, their cameras and recording equipment ready to capture every moment of the royal family's appearance. The photographers moved with practiced efficiency, understanding that their images would be analyzed and discussed around the world within hours of being taken. Today, however, there was an additional sense of anticipation among the press corps, as recent rumors and speculation had created an atmosphere of heightened interest in the family's interactions. Palace staff members were stationed throughout the gardens, their presence barely noticeable yet essential for ensuring that everything proceeded smoothly. Years of experience had taught them to blend into the background while remaining vigilant for any situations that might require their intervention. The head of security conducted one final review of the arrangements, his trained eyes scanning the crowd and the perimeter for any potential concerns. The military band had taken their position near the palace's garden entrance, their instruments gleaming in the afternoon light as they prepared to provide the musical accompaniment for the royal family's entrance. The stirring notes of the national anthem would soon fill the air, marking the formal beginning of an event that had been months in the planning but would unfold over just a few crucial hours. Inside the palace, the final preparations were reaching their conclusion as the royal family gathered in the designated staging area. The protocol officers moved with quiet efficiency, ensuring that every detail of the entrance procedure had been reviewed and understood. These moments before public appearances were always filled with a particular kind of tension, as the transition from private family members to public figures required both mental and emotional preparation. Charles stood at the center of the gathering, his presence commanding even in these informal moments before the ceremony began. His years of experience in such situations were evident in his calm demeanor. Yet those who knew him well could detect subtle signs of the pressure he felt as both monarch and family patriarch. The weight of representing not just himself, but the entire institution of the monarchy was never more apparent than in these public moments. Queen Camilla adjusted her hat one final time, her movements precise and practiced after years of public appearances. Her relationship with the media and the public had evolved significantly over the decades, transforming from one of intense scrutiny and criticism to a more measured acceptance of her role within the royal family. Yet the underlying complexities of her position were never far from the surface, particularly during family gatherings where past tensions could resurface unexpectedly. Catherine checked her appearance in a small, compact mirror, her actions reflecting the same attention to detail that had characterized her approach to royal duties since joining the family. Her natural elegance and genuine warmth had made her one of the most popular members of the royal family, creating expectations that she carried gracefully, but not without awareness of their weight. Today, she seemed particularly focused, as if sensing that the afternoon ahead would require her best diplomatic skills. William stood beside his wife, his protective instincts evident in the way he monitored the atmosphere around them. His position as heir to the throne had given him unique insights into the pressures faced by each family member, and he had developed a keen ability to read the emotional undercurrents that could affect public appearances. Today, he seemed more alert than usual, his attention shifting between his father and his wife in a way that suggested he was aware of potential complications. The moment arrived for their entrance into the gardens, and the family began to move in the carefully choreographed order that had been rehearsed and refined over years of such events. The military band struck up the opening notes of the national anthem, and the hundreds of guests turned their attention toward the palace entrance, their conversations fading into respectful silence. Charles emerged first, his bearing regal and confident as he acknowledged the gathered crowd with a warm smile and gentle wave. The guests responded with enthusiastic applause, their genuine affection for the monarchy evident in their expressions and gestures. For many of these individuals, this represented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be in the presence of their sovereign, and their excitement was palpable. Queen Camilla followed, her elegant appearance and gracious demeanor reflecting the years of experience she had gained in royal protocol. Her interactions with the crowd were warm but measured, demonstrating the careful balance she had learned to maintain between accessibility and dignity. The public's response to her presence had evolved over time, and today's gathering represented another step in her ongoing journey as queen consort. Catherine and William emerged together, their natural chemistry and obvious affection for each other creating an immediate positive response from the assembled guests. Their ability to connect with people from all walks of life had made them particularly effective representatives of the modern monarchy, and their presence added an element of youthful energy to the proceedings. The family began the traditional walkabout, moving through different sections of the garden to greet as many guests as possible. This informal mingling was one of the most challenging aspects of royal appearances, requiring the ability to engage meaningfully with dozens of people while maintaining the careful timing that kept the entire event on schedule. Charles found himself drawn into conversations with several of the honored guests, his genuine interest in their stories and achievements evident in the way he listened and responded. A young teacher from Manchester captured his attention with her account of establishing a literacy program in an area where educational resources were limited. Her passion and dedication reminded him of the reasons these gatherings were so important, providing opportunities to recognize and celebrate the often unsung heroes who made significant differences in their communities. As the king engaged with this teacher, discussing the challenges and rewards of her work, Catherine moved through another section of the garden, her natural warmth creating instant connections with the people she met. An elderly gentleman who had spent decades volunteering at a local food bank shared his experiences with her, his face lighting up as she asked thoughtful questions about his work and its impact on the community. Queen Camilla found herself in conversation with a group of healthcare workers who had been recognized for their exceptional service during recent challenging times. Their stories of dedication and sacrifice resonated with her own understanding of duty and service, and she listened with genuine interest as they described the ways they had supported their patients and communities. The afternoon progressed smoothly, with each member of the royal family fulfilling their roles with the skill and grace that years of experience had developed. Yet beneath the surface of these pleasant interactions, there were subtle undercurrents that began to manifest in small but significant ways. Charles found his attention increasingly drawn to Catherine's interactions with the guests, noting the ease with which she connected with people and the genuine enthusiasm she brought to each conversation. Her natural empathy and intelligence were evident in the way she engaged with the honored guests, asking questions that went beyond polite small talk to demonstrate real interest in their experiences and achievements. As the traditional tea service began, with palace staff circulating through the gardens with trays of sandwiches and pastries, the royal family regrouped near the main pavilion that had been erected for the occasion. This central location allowed them to continue greeting guests while also providing a focal point for the afternoon's more formal elements. It was during this gathering around the pavilion that the first signs of attention that had been building beneath the surface began to become visible to those who were watching carefully. The careful choreography that usually characterized royal appearances showed subtle signs of strain as personal dynamics began to influence the public performance. Catherine's natural position within these family groupings had evolved over the years, reflecting both her growing confidence in her role and the genuine affection she had developed with various family members. Today, however, her interactions seemed to carry an additional significance that was not lost on the observant guests and media representatives who were watching every gesture and expression. Charles found himself increasingly aware of Catherine's presence and her effect on both the gathered guests and the overall atmosphere of the event. Her ability to bring warmth and authenticity to these formal occasions had always impressed him, but today there seemed to be an additional quality to her interactions that drew his attention repeatedly. The king's awareness of Catherine's impact on the gathering was not lost on Queen Camilla, who had developed her own keen sensitivity to family dynamics over the years. Her position within the royal hierarchy had required her to navigate complex relationships and shifting loyalties, and she was acutely aware of the subtle changes that were beginning to manifest during this public appearance. As the afternoon continued, these underlying tensions began to create an atmosphere that was felt by many of those present, even if they could not fully understand or articulate what they were observing. The careful balance that had characterized the royal family's public appearances was showing signs of strain in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore or explain away through the usual diplomatic channels. The atmosphere in the palace gardens had reached a crescendo of warmth and celebration as the afternoon progressed, with hundreds of guests thoroughly enjoying their rare opportunity to interact with the royal family in such an intimate setting. The conversations flowed easily between the honored citizens and their sovereign, creating the kind of magical moments that made these gatherings so special and memorable for all involved. Yet beneath this surface of royal charm and public celebration, a more complex drama was beginning to unfold among the family members themselves. The subtle tensions that had been building over recent months were starting to manifest in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal, even within the carefully controlled environment of a formal palace event. Charles found himself caught in an emotional cross-current that was both unexpected and deeply troubling. His relationship with Catherine had evolved naturally over the years from formal royal protocol to genuine familial affection. But something about today's interactions was stirring feelings and responses that went beyond what he had anticipated or prepared for. As Catherine moved gracefully through the crowd, engaging with guests with her characteristic warmth and intelligence, Charles became increasingly aware of her every gesture, every smile, every moment of connection she made with the people around her. Her natural ability to make others feel valued and heard had always impressed him, but today it seemed to be affecting him in ways that were both powerful and concerning. The king's attention was drawn to a conversation Catherine was having with a young mother who had been honored for her work establishing support groups for military families. Catherine's empathy was evident as she listened to the woman's story, her questions demonstrating a depth of understanding that went far beyond polite interest. The genuine compassion in her voice and the way she instinctively reached out to touch the woman's arm in a gesture of support showcased the qualities that had made her such an effective representative of the modern monarchy. Queen Camilla, meanwhile, was engaged in her own conversations with guests, but her years of experience in reading the subtle dynamics of royal family interactions had made her increasingly aware of the shift in Charles's behavior and focus. She noticed the way his eyes followed Catherine's movements through the garden, the way his conversations with other guests seemed to lack their usual engagement, and the subtle changes in his posture and demeanor that suggested his attention was elsewhere. The queen consort had spent years navigating the complex emotional landscape of the royal family, understanding better than most the delicate balance required to maintain harmony within such a high-profile household. Her own journey to acceptance and integration had taught her to be sensitive to signs of instability or change within the family dynamics, and what she was observing today was triggering concerns that went beyond simple family tensions. Prince William was also becoming aware that something unusual was developing during the afternoon's proceedings. His protective instincts, particularly regarding Catherine and Their family's position within the royal hierarchy made him naturally attuned to any shifts in the established order. He began to notice his father's unusual focus on Catherine, and the way that focus was creating ripple effects throughout the family's public presentation. The protocol officers and senior palace staff were trained to observe everything while appearing to see nothing. Their professional skills honed through years of managing royal events, where personal dramas could unfold alongside public ceremonies. Several of them began to detect subtle changes in the family dynamics, noting shifts in positioning, alterations in typical interaction patterns, and an overall tension that was beginning to affect the carefully orchestrated flow of the afternoon's activities. As the formal presentation of awards began, with Charles preparing to honor several of the guests for their exceptional contributions to their communities, the underlying tensions within the family started to create more visible disruptions to the planned proceedings. The king's usual commanding presence during such ceremonies seemed somewhat distracted, his attention divided between his official duties and his growing awareness of Catherine's presence and impact. Catherine, for her part, remained focused on her role and responsibilities, but she was beginning to sense that something was shifting in the family dynamics around her. Her emotional intelligence, which had served her so well in navigating the complexities of royal life, made her increasingly aware of the undercurrents that were affecting the afternoon's atmosphere. The first award presentation proceeded smoothly, with Charles honoring a retired firefighter who had dedicated decades to community safety and emergency response. The ceremony followed the traditional format, with the king's words appropriately formal yet warm, expressing genuine appreciation for the honoree's service and dedication. Yet, even during this official moment, those watching closely could detect a subtle distraction in Charles's manner. As the presentations continued, the king found himself increasingly drawn to observe Catherine's reactions to each ceremony, noting her genuine engagement with each honoree's story and her obvious pleasure in witnessing their recognition. Her ability to find personal connection and meaning in these formal occasions was something that had always impressed him, but today it seemed to be resonating with him in ways that were both profound and unsettling. The second honoree was an elderly woman who had spent 50 years teaching in disadvantaged communities, never seeking recognition, but consistently making extraordinary differences in the lives of her students. As Charles presented her award and listened to the brief account of her achievements, he found himself wondering what Catherine's response would be to this woman's dedication and selflessness. When he glanced toward Catherine during the ceremony, he saw exactly what he had expected: genuine tears of emotion as she listened to the teacher's story, her heart clearly moved by the account of quiet heroism and lifelong service. The authentic nature of Catherine's emotional response struck Charles with unexpected force, highlighting qualities about her that seemed to shine particularly brightly in this setting. Queen Camilla observed this exchange between her husband and daughter-in-law with growing concern. Her position within the family had taught her to be sensitive to emotional undercurrents that could threaten the stability they all worked so hard to maintain. What she was witnessing today suggested developments that could have far-reaching implications for everyone involved. The third presentation involved a group of volunteers who had created a community garden project that had transformed a neglected area of East London into a thriving neighborhood resource. As Charles spoke about the importance of grassroots initiatives and community leadership, his words seemed to carry additional weight and passion that reflected his growing emotional investment in the afternoon's proceedings. Catherine's response to this particular ceremony was especially enthusiastic, as environmental and community projects had always been close to her heart. Her genuine excitement and pride in the honoree's achievements was evident to everyone present, creating a moment of connection between her personal interests and the formal royal recognition being bestowed. It was during this third presentation that Charles made a decision that would later be analyzed and discussed by royal observers for years to come. As the ceremony concluded and the traditional receiving line formed for final acknowledgments, the king found himself moving toward Catherine rather than following the established protocol that would have positioned him next to Queen Camilla. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable to those familiar with royal protocol. Instead of maintaining his traditional position beside his wife, Charles found himself drawn to stand closer to Catherine, engaging her in conversation about the afternoon's honorees and seeking her perspectives on the ceremonies they had just witnessed. This break from established protocol was noticed immediately by the palace staff, the media representatives, and, most significantly, by Queen Camilla herself. The Queen Consort's years of experience in royal ceremonies made her acutely aware of when established patterns were being disrupted, and the implications of such disruptions for the family's public image and internal harmony. William stepped closer to his wife and father, his protective instincts activated by the unusual dynamics he was observing. His position as heir apparent had given him a unique understanding of the pressures and responsibilities that affected every member of the royal family, and he could sense that the afternoon's events were moving into uncharted territory that could have serious consequences. The guests and media present were beginning to notice the subtle shifts in royal protocol, though few understood the full significance of what they were observing. Cameras captured every moment, every gesture, every expression, creating a permanent record of an afternoon that was transforming from a routine royal engagement into something far more complex and potentially consequential. As the formal portions of the garden party began to wind down, the tensions that had been building throughout the afternoon were approaching a moment of crystallization that would force everyone involved to confront the changing dynamics within the heart of the British monarchy. The final moments of the garden party had arrived, and the traditional conclusion to such events called for the royal family to gather together for the ceremonial farewell to their guests. This was typically one of the most carefully choreographed elements of any royal gathering, with each family member taking their designated position according to established protocol that had been refined over decades of such occasions. The hundreds of guests began to form the traditional assembly on the main lawn, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of an afternoon spent in the presence of their royal family. Many clutched programs, photographs, and small mementos that would serve as treasured reminders of this extraordinary experience. The military band prepared for their final performance, which would provide the musical backdrop for the royal family's departure from the gardens. Palace staff moved efficiently throughout the area, beginning the discreet process of preparing for the transition from public ceremony to private family time. The photographers and media representatives positioned themselves for the final shots of the day, knowing that these closing images would be among the most closely analyzed and widely circulated from the entire event. Yet as the royal family began to move toward their traditional positions for the farewell ceremony, the tensions that had been building throughout the afternoon reached a critical moment that would be remembered as one of the most significant breaches of royal protocol in recent memory. Charles, instead of moving to his customary position beside Queen Camilla, found himself walking directly toward Catherine. The movement was deliberate and unmistakable, representing a choice that went far beyond simple positioning or protocol preferences. As he approached her, the king extended his arm in the traditional gesture that would typically be offered to his wife, inviting Catherine to take her place beside him for the ceremony's conclusion. The moment seemed to unfold in slow motion as hundreds of eyes focused on this unexpected development. Catherine's surprise was evident in her expression, her usual composure momentarily shaken by the unprecedented nature of her father-in-law's gesture. For a few seconds that felt like an eternity, she stood frozen between surprise and uncertainty, clearly understanding the significance of what was being offered to her. Queen Camilla watched this scene unfold with a mixture of shock and hurt that she struggled to conceal behind her practiced royal demeanor. Her years of experience in managing public appearances served her well in this moment, as she maintained her dignity despite the very public nature of what felt like a profound personal slight. The careful composure that had carried her through decades of scrutiny and criticism was tested as never before. William stepped forward instinctively, his protective instincts activated by the unprecedented situation developing before his eyes. His position as heir to the throne gave him unique insight into the potential consequences of such a dramatic break from established protocol, and His concern was evident in his expression as he assessed the rapidly evolving dynamics. Catherine, drawing upon all of her experience in navigating complex royal situations, made a decision that would later be praised for its wisdom and diplomatic skill. Rather than accepting Charles's offer, which would have created an even more dramatic breach of protocol, she gracefully declined with a subtle gesture and gentle words that acknowledged the king's gesture while redirecting the situation back toward more appropriate channels. "Your Majesty," Catherine said quietly, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by those nearby. "I believe Queen Camilla is waiting for you." Her words were accompanied by a meaningful glance toward the queen consort, who stood at a distance with her dignity intact but her isolation clearly visible to all who were watching. The king's response to Catherine's diplomatic intervention revealed the depth of the emotional currents that had been building throughout the afternoon. For a moment, his carefully maintained royal composure slipped, and those watching could see the genuine conflict playing out across his features. The pull he felt toward Catherine was evident, as was his recognition of the appropriateness of her guidance back toward protocol. Charles stood motionless for what felt like an extended moment, his internal struggle visible to the assembled guests, palace staff, and media representatives who were witnessing this extraordinary break from royal tradition. The silence that fell across the garden was profound, creating a sense of suspended animation as everyone waited to see how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. Queen Camilla, demonstrating the grace and strength that had carried her through years of public scrutiny, began to move toward her husband with measured steps. Her expression remained composed, but those who knew her well could detect the profound hurt and confusion behind her professional demeanor. Her years of dedication to royal duty and her careful integration into the family structure were being tested in the most public way possible. The moment that would give rise to the story's title occurred as Charles finally began to move, his decision made, but his emotional conflict still evident. As he turned toward Queen Camilla, his movement was reluctant and clearly difficult for him. The gesture toward Catherine had been instinctive and heartfelt, while his return to protocol felt forced and contrary to his evident desires. The silence that had fallen across the palace gardens was unlike anything the staff could remember from previous royal events. The usual sounds of polite conversation, rustling programs, and gentle movement had ceased entirely as hundreds of people witnessed what they instinctively understood to be a moment of profound significance, even if they could not fully comprehend its implications. As Charles finally reached Queen Camilla and offered her his arm in the traditional gesture, the queen consort accepted with the dignity that had characterized her public role throughout her years of service. Yet the damage to the afternoon's proceedings and to the family's internal dynamics had been done, creating ripples that would be felt for years to come. The military band began their final performance, the stirring notes providing a soundtrack for what had become one of the most memorable and troubling royal appearances in recent history. The guests joined in singing the national anthem, their voices rising together in the traditional conclusion to such events. But the usual sense of celebration and unity had been replaced by an undercurrent of confusion and concern. Catherine stood with William, her hand firmly in his arm as they maintained their appropriate positions within the family grouping. Her wisdom in handling the unprecedented situation had prevented an even more dramatic breach of protocol, but the afternoon's events had revealed tensions and attractions that could not be easily dismissed or forgotten. The royal family completed their farewell ceremony with the professionalism that years of public service had ingrained in them all, but the careful balance that had characterized their relationships had been fundamentally altered. The protocols and traditions that provided structure for their public appearances had proven insufficient to contain the human emotions and attractions that had surfaced during the afternoon's events. As the guests began to depart from the palace gardens, many carrying with them stories and observations that would be shared and discussed for years to come, the royal family retreated to their private quarters to confront the consequences of what had occurred. The afternoon that was meant to celebrate community service and royal tradition had instead become a watershed moment that would require careful management and difficult conversations in the days ahead. The media representatives who had captured every moment of the unprecedented scene began their work of analyzing and reporting on what they had witnessed, understanding that the images and video from the afternoon would be scrutinized around the world. The story of the garden party, where the king reached for Catherine instead of Camilla, would become part of royal history, marking a moment when personal desires and public duty came into dramatic conflict. Palace officials would spend the following weeks working to manage the fallout from the afternoon's events, crafting explanations and conducting damage control, while the royal family themselves grappled with the personal and institutional implications of what had occurred. The careful balance between individual desires and royal responsibility had been tested in ways that would require new approaches and difficult decisions. The garden party had concluded, but its consequences would reverberate through the halls of Buckingham Palace and the broader institution of the British monarchy for years to come, marking the afternoon when silence fell across the palace gardens as King Charles reached for Catherine, the Princess of Wales, instead of his wife Queen Camilla, forever changing the dynamics of the royal family and the public's perception of the relationships at the heart of the modern British monarchy.